What is this? Where did you get this ID from? Sir, that's my military identification and my orders. I'm on active duty. Anybody can print something like this. That's a senior chief in Naval Special Warfare. Why am I being treated like this?
At 12:33 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, the sleek terminal of a bustling East Coast airport became ground zero for a civil rights violation that would reverberate from local news to Pentagon briefing rooms in less time than it takes to board a flight. Officer Marcus Davis, badge number 492, made a split-second decision based on the color of a man's skin rather than the content of his character or the ribbons on his chest. He looked at Senior Chief Petty Officer Malik Rowan, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 14 years of distinguished service, and saw not a decorated warrior, but a suspicious individual. Rowan stood near Gate 17, his Navy service dress blue uniform immaculate, his posture parade ground perfect. The uniform displayed multiple rows of ribbons, bronze star with Valor, Purple Heart, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. His rank insignia, the gold fouled anchor of a senior chief petty officer, gleamed on his sleeve. He was waiting to board a flight to Washington, D.C., where he was scheduled to receive recognition for his leadership in a classified operation. He was calm. He was compliant. He was black. And to Officer Davis, that was the only detail that mattered. "Sir, I need to see some identification," Davis barked, his hand already resting on his duty belt. His Bodycam was recording. So were a dozen cell phones. And what happened next would become a textbook case of how racial profiling, unchecked authority, and ego can collide with catastrophic consequences. In the United States, black service members are 2.5 times more likely to be stopped by law enforcement than their white counterparts, even when in uniform. What you're about to witness isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. Officer Marcus Davis clocked in at 11:47 a.m. with the kind of bitterness that had calcified into his bones over 12 years on the force. He yanked his duty belt tight, the leather creaking with familiar resentment. Passed over for sergeant. Again. The third time in 4 years, and he knew exactly why. The department's new diversity initiatives, the mandatory training modules about implicit bias that he'd clicked through without reading. The younger officers, women, minorities, people who checked boxes, getting promoted over veterans like him who'd put in the work, walked the beat, earned their stripes the hard way. His partner, Derek Walsh, 26 and barely 3 years out of the academy, had learned early to keep his mouth shut when Davis started ranting. Walsh nodded along, laughed at the right moments, and tried not to think too hard about the 17 complaints buried in Davis's personnel file, complaints he'd glimpsed once in the records room before a supervisor hastily closed the folder. Racial profiling, excessive force, discourteous behavior, all marked unfounded or unsubstantiated, all quietly filed away. They moved through the terminal in that practiced patrol rhythm, Davis's eyes constantly scanning, cataloging, profiling. Families heading to Disney World, business travelers glued to laptops, college kids with overstuffed backpacks. And then, near Gate 17, he saw him. The black man in the Navy uniform stood with parade ground posture, checking his phone. The uniform was immaculate. Too immaculate, Davis thought. The ribbons too numerous, the rank insignia too high, and Senior Chief Petty Officer. Davis felt his jaw tighten. Something wasn't right. His instincts were firing, that gut-level alarm system he'd learned to trust more than policy or procedure. "Watch this," Davis muttered to Walsh, already changing trajectory. "Something's off about that one." Walsh followed his partner's gaze and saw a serviceman waiting for his flight. Clean uniform, calm demeanor, nothing suspicious. But he'd learned not to question Davis's hunches out loud. The last rookie who'd challenged him spent 6 months partnered with the oldest, meanest training officer in the department. Davis saw something entirely different. He saw a black man in a costume, playing dress-up, trying to access privileges he hadn't earned. He saw a fraud. He saw a threat. The difference between their perceptions wasn't training or experience. It was the color of Rowan's skin refracted through the lens of Davis's unchecked bias. A bias that had survived 17 complaints because no one had ever made him face real consequences. Today, that would change. Studies show that implicit bias training without accountability measures changes nothing. What changes behavior isn't education, it's consequences. Davis crossed the terminal with purposeful strides, his hand already resting on his duty belt in that universal gesture of authority. Walsh followed half a step behind, uneasy but silent. By the time they reached Gate 17, Davis had already decided this encounter would go one way. "Excuse me, sir. Can I see some identification?" The words came out sharp, accusatory, nothing like the polite request they pretended to be. Rowan had been mid-text to his wife, landed safe, "I love you," when the voice cut through. He looked up, took in the uniform, the body language, the tone, and felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. He'd been here before. 16 years old, walking home from football practice. 23, pulled over in his own neighborhood. 28, stopped outside his own apartment building. Different cities, different officers, same script. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" Rowan's voice was steady, controlled, the product of 2 decades of training, military and survival. He reached for his wallet slowly, deliberately, narrating each movement like he was defusing a bomb. "I'm reaching for my wallet now, in my right rear pocket. Military, ID, and travel orders." Davis's eyes weren't on Rowan's hands. They were fixed on the uniform, scanning the ribbons like he was searching for a counterfeit bill. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Combat V. Too many. Too high a rank. Nobody earned that much hardware. "Where'd you get that uniform?" The question landed like a slap. Rowan felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. "I earned it, sir. I'm active duty Navy, Senior Chief Petty Officer, 14 years of service." He extended his military ID and official travel orders, the documents crisp and official, embossed with Department of Defense seals. Davis smirked, the expression ugly and knowing. "Right. And I'm a 4-star general." Behind him, Walsh shifted his weight, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. The silence was its own form of complicity. Rowan held the documents steady, waiting. Davis finally took them, but his eyes barely tracked across the text. The photo matched. The rank matched. The holographic security features caught the light. None of it mattered. Davis had already made his decision the moment he saw a black man in a uniform he didn't believe black men earned. "These could be fake," Davis said, handing them back with disdain. "Stolen valor's a crime, you know?" Around them, passengers were beginning to notice. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter. A businessman paused mid-stride, watching, and Rowan felt the walls closing in, knowing that every second of calm he maintained was another second of survival. At what point does suspicious become a code word for black? Rowan's heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice stayed level. Years of training, staying calm under fire, or controlling breathing during underwater demolition, maintaining composure when lives depended on it, all channeled into this moment. "Officer, those documents are issued by the Department of Defense. I can provide you with contact information for my commanding officer. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Davis's command sliced through the air, final and non-negotiable. Rowan froze. This was the moment. Every black man in America knows this moment, has rehearsed it in his mind, has been warned about it by fathers and uncles and older brothers. comply, and hope your submission is enough. Assert your rights and risk becoming a hashtag. The calculations happened in microseconds. Children at home, wife waiting for his call, the ceremony in D.C. Tomorrow, the career he'd built through blood and sacrifice, all of it balanced against the constitutional rights he'd sworn to defend. "Sir, respectfully, on what grounds are you detaining me?" His voice was steady, professional, the tone he'd use addressing a superior officer. Davis's face transformed. The smirk vanished, replaced by something darker. Rage at being questioned, fury at having his authority challenged by someone he'd already decided didn't deserve respect. "On the grounds that I said so. Turn. Around. Now." The terminal had gone quiet in that pocket of space around them. Passengers stood frozen, their faces registering confusion, concern, horror. An elderly white woman clutched her husband's arm, whispering urgently, "That poor serviceman. He hasn't done anything wrong." 30 feet away, a black mother pulled her 7-year-old son closer, her hand gentle but firm on his shoulder. I'm whispering, "Don't stare, baby. Look away." She knew what her son didn't yet understand, that witnessing could mean being next. Rowan took a slow breath. He'd survived firefights in Kandahar, close-quarters combat in urban hellscapes, missions that remained classified because of their brutality. He would survive this. He turned slowly, extending his hands behind his back in the universal gesture of surrender. His fingers spread, palms open, every movement calculated to signal non-threat. But Davis saw defiance. He saw the seconds of hesitation, the question about grounds, the steady eye contact as challenge rather than respect. His hand moved to his cuffs, but his mind was already beyond restraint. Rowan had questioned him, in front of witnesses, in front of his partner. And Davis, fueled by 12 years of unchecked authority and rage at a world that no longer automatically deferred to his badge, made his fatal mistake. Researchers have found that black men are perceived as larger and more threatening than white men of identical size. Rowan is 5 feet 10 inches and 185 pounds. In Davis's eyes, he's a giant. Davis didn't reach for handcuffs with the clinical detachment of an arrest. He grabbed Rowan's wrist and wrenched it upward in a pain compliance hold, the kind taught in academies, but meant for active resistance, not surrendered hands. The joint screamed. Rowan's shoulder socket strained against tendons. His body did what bodies do when subjected to sudden, intense pain. It flinched, pulled instinctively away from the source. "Resisting," Davis snarled, and the word became permission. Walsh moved in without thinking, without questioning, muscle memory and training, overriding whatever doubt flickered in his gut. 2 sets of hands now controlled Rowan's body. They drove him forward, momentum and force combined, and slammed him chest first into a support pillar. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. Before he could recover, they forced him downward. His knees hit first, then his chest, then his face met the polished terminal tile with a sickening crack that echoed across the gate area. Blood bloomed immediately, trickling from his split lip onto the white floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. A child began crying. All around them, cell phones rose like witnesses at a trial, recording every angle, every second, the evidence mounting in real time across a dozen devices. On Davis's Bodycam, crystal clear, his voice cut through the chaos. "These people always think they can fake their way into places they don't belong." Rowan forced his body to go limp. Every instinct screamed to fight, to use the combat training that could incapacitate both officers in seconds, to defend himself. But he knew the rules of this different battlefield. Survival meant submission. He kept his hands behind his back and spoke clearly, projecting his voice toward the Bodycam he knew was recording. I am not resisting. I am a U.S. Navy SEAL. Check my identification. Davis shifted his weight, driving his knee between Rowan's shoulder blades, grinding him into the floor. The pressure made breathing difficult. Sure you are, buddy. The mockery in his voice was thick, contemptuous. Around them, passengers stood frozen in horror, their phones capturing a decorated serviceman bleeding on an airport floor, while two officers knelt on him like he was spoils of war rather than a citizen, a veteran, a human being. Rowan tasted copper. His shoulder throbbed. The tile was cold against his cheek. And somewhere in the back of his mind, through the pain and humiliation, a thought crystallized. The cameras were watching. The evidence was mounting. And justice, however delayed, was now inevitable. Between 2015 and 2020, Black Americans were 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. Compliance is not a bulletproof vest. Captain Lisa Morrison was reviewing security logs when her radio exploded with frantic chatter. Gate 17, officers down on a subject, blood on the floor, passengers recording. We need supervision. Now. She ran, for her 15 years as Army military police, giving her legs urgency before her brain fully processed the words. She rounded the corner, and her mind stuttered, unable to reconcile what her eyes reported. 2 uniformed officers kneeling on a man in full military dress blues. Navy. The uniform was unmistakable even from 30 feet away. Then the details hit her like incoming rounds. The rows of ribbons, the rank insignia, the blood pooling on white tile. Get off him, now! Her voice wasn't raised, it was weaponized. Command presence learned from deployments where hesitation cost lives. Davis looked up, his expression shifting from concentration to annoyance at the interruption. Ma'am, we have this under control. I said get off him! Morrison closed the distance in 4 strides. She wasn't asking. Years of military police work had trained her to see what civilians missed, to read rank like a language, to understand the chain of command was absolute. And what she saw now made her blood turn to ice water. The gold trident pin on the man's chest. Navy SEAL, elite warfare operator. And these 2 idiots were kneeling on him like he was a common criminal. Davis stood reluctantly, radiating resentment. Walsh released Rowan's legs and stepped back, his face pale, finally understanding they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Morrison knelt beside Rowan, her knees hitting the blood-slicked tile. Senior Chief, I'm Captain Morrison, Airport Security. Are you injured? Rowan, still handcuffed, his face pressed against the floor, spoke with the clarity of a damage report. Possible concussion, ma'am. Facial laceration, on shoulder injury from the compliance hold. Each word was evidence, clinical and devastating. Morrison's jaw muscles flexed. She stood, scooped Rowan's military ID from where it had slid under a seat, and thrust it at Davis like a weapon. Her finger stabbed at the holographic seal, the rank designation, the photo that matched the bleeding man at their feet. You just assaulted an active-duty Navy SEAL, Officer Davis. She let the words hang, watching comprehension dawn across his face like a terminal diagnosis. I hope your lawyer's good. Around them, a dozen phones captured everything. The evidence was irrefutable, the damage irreversible. What if Morrison hadn't been there? What if no one with authority had intervened? How many times does this scenario play out with no one to stop it? Morrison stepped away from the scene, her radio already alive with urgent cross-chatter. Airport command, medical response, shift supervisors. Everyone wanted answers she didn't have time to give. She made the first call to her chief, her voice low and clipped. We have a situation. 2 officers just used force on an active-duty military service member, Navy SEAL, Senior Chief. I need immediate lockdown on all bodycam footage from Officers Davis and Walsh. No reviews, no edits. Secure it now. The chief's response was immediate. Done. Don't let anyone touch those cameras. The second call required verification first. Morrison pulled up the Department of Defense personnel database on her tablet, entering Rowan's ID number with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. The record populated. Senior Chief Petty Officer Malik J. Rowan, SEAL Team Designation Classified, on 14 years active duty. Current status: active. Security clearance: TS/S. CI. Her stomach dropped. She dialed Naval Station Norfolk's duty officer. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. Morrison explained the situation in military brevity: assault, use of force, injuries, local police involvement. The duty officer's response was instantaneous and absolute. Do not move him. Do not allow those officers to leave the scene. Federal authorities are being notified now. NCIS is being activated. This is now a federal matter. Morrison returned to find Davis in full justification mode, his hands gesturing as he spoke to a gathering crowd of airport staff. He was acting suspicious, refusing to comply with lawful orders. Your body cam will tell a different story, won't it, odd officer? Morrison's voice cut through his explanation like a blade through tissue. Davis's face drained of color. The body cam. His hand moved unconsciously to the device clipped to his chest, the small red light still blinking its faithful record. He hadn't thought about it during the encounter. He never did. Muscle memory and adrenaline overriding policy, bias overriding training. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. Rowan sat in the wheelchair paramedics had brought, his hands now free of cuffs, his face being cleaned of blood by an EMT who worked with gentle, apologetic efficiency. He said nothing. Didn't need to. He'd witnessed enough military investigations, enough courts-martial, enough chains of command activated to know what happened next. The wheels of military justice turned slowly, grinding through bureaucracy and protocol, but they turned with the inevitability of orbital mechanics, and once set in motion, they ground everything in their path to dust. The average police officer receives 58 hours of firearms training. The average officer receives 8 hours of de-escalation training. Priorities reveal values. NCIS, Special Agent Jennifer Kozlowski, and her partner were reviewing maritime fraud case files in a secure airport office when her phone lit up with the kind of call that turns routine assignments into career-defining moments. Naval service member assaulted. Active duty. SEAL. Local PD involved. She and Special Agent Marcus Chen were in their vehicle and moving before the duty officer finished briefing them. 12 minutes after the assault, they arrived in unmarked SUVs, their credentials already in hand. Kozlowski's 20 years investigating military crimes had given her a particular skill. Reading a scene in seconds and knowing exactly who was lying. She stepped into the court and gate area, and her eyes tracked from Rowan in the wheelchair to the two officers standing apart, to Morrison coordinating witness statements, to the blood still wet on the terminal floor. I need all body cam footage, witness statements, and both officers secured separately for questioning. Her voice carried the weight of federal authority, not loud, but absolute. Davis stepped forward, his training kicking in even as his world collapsed. Agent, this is a misunderstanding. We received a call about a suspicious individual. Kozlowski's expression stopped him mid-sentence. Her eyes were cold, clinical, the look of someone who'd heard every excuse, every justification, every lie that officers told themselves when they crossed lines they couldn't uncross. Officer Davis, I'm investigating an assault on a federal service member. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. The terminal transformed into a federal crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off Gate 17. Chen was already interviewing witnesses, his tablet recording statements. Airport IT was uploading Bodycam footage to encrypted federal servers. Morrison handed over her preliminary report. And in Washington, D.C., 3 time zones away, attorneys in the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division were being pulled from lunch meetings and briefed on an incident that was still unfolding. Walsh stood apart from his partner, his face ashen, the weight of realization crushing down. He turned to Davis, his voice barely a whisper. "Marcus, what did we do?" Davis's bravado was fragmenting, cracks spreading through the certainty that had carried him through 12 years of unchecked authority. Just let me think." His hands moved uselessly, grasping for control that had already slipped away. But there was nothing to think about. The body cams had recorded everything. The witnesses had filmed everything. The evidence was already uploading to servers he couldn't access, being reviewed by investigators he couldn't influence. It was already over. The only question now was how much wreckage would be left when the wheels stopped grinding. Justice delayed is justice denied. But what about justice that comes too late to undo the trauma? Rowan will heal physically. Will he ever feel safe in uniform again? In a windowless, secure room at Airport Police Headquarters, federal investigators and internal affairs officers sat in uncomfortable silence as the body cam footage played for the 4th time. They'd watched from every available angle: Davis's camera, Walsh's camera, airport security feeds, 3 separate witness cell phone videos synced to the timeline. Each viewing revealed new details. Each replay made the evidence more damning. The racial comment: "These people always think they can fake their way into places they don't belong." Clear, unambiguous, time-stamped. The excessive force. The pain compliance hold on a man with his hands already behind his back. The slam into the pillar. The drive to the ground. The knee in the spine. Rowan's compliance, his narrated movements, his clear identification. From his lack of resistance even as his face met the tile. Davis's escalation. Every decision point where de-escalation was possible and force was chosen instead. The lead investigator, a 26-year FBI veteran named Robert Chen, paused the footage and removed his glasses. "This isn't police work. This is assault under color of law." On the video conference screen, the Department of Justice attorney nodded grimly. "We're filing federal charges. Deprivation of rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. If convicted, they're looking at up to 10 years. She shuffled papers off screen. "NCIS is coordinating with us. This goes beyond local misconduct." Internal Affairs had pulled Davis's complete personnel file. The complaint history told its own story. 17 total complaints over 12 years. 3 specifically alleging racial profiling. What all marked unfounded or unsubstantiated. The investigations, if they could be called that, consisted of Davis's statement denying wrongdoing and nothing more. No witness interviews, no pattern analysis, no accountability. Walsh's record was cleaner, but his failure to intervene, his complicity in the violence, made him equally culpable under federal law. The airport police chief watched the footage one final time, then removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes with hands that trembled slightly. "Suspend them both, effective immediately. Pending termination proceedings. I want their badges, weapons, and access credentials now." Davis and Walsh were escorted from the building separately, stripped of their equipment, their faces blank with shock. By 5:47 p.m., the footage had leaked, whether from a witness's phone or an anonymous source within the department. No one would confirm. By the evening news cycle, the nation was watching a decorated Navy SEAL bleed on an airport floor while 2 officers knelt on him like conquerors. In 2023, only 30% of police officers fired for misconduct lost their certification. Many simply moved to another department. Will Davis and Walsh be part of the 30% or the 70%? 6 months after the assault, the federal courthouse was packed beyond capacity, overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. Davis and Walsh stood before the judge in ill-fitting civilian clothes, their lawyers flanking them like pallbearers at a funeral. They pled no contest to federal civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law. And the plea deal spared them prison time in exchange for lifetime bans from law enforcement, 2,000 hours of community service, and permanent surrender of their peace officer certifications. The judge's voice was clinical as she accepted the plea, but her eyes held something harder when she addressed them directly. You violated the oath you took to protect and serve. You betrayed the public trust. These consequences are permanent. Rowan's civil lawsuit against the city settled for $4.7 million 2 weeks later. The money wasn't the point. Rowan had made that clear to his attorneys from the beginning. The settlement mandated reforms with enforcement mechanisms, implicit bias training audited by external reviewers, bodycam footage subject to random civilian review, and a citizen oversight board with subpoena power and binding authority. The airport police chief resigned under pressure. The entire force was restructured under federal consent decree, their policies rewritten, their culture forced into accountability it had avoided for decades. On a Thursday evening, Rowan stood before 300 people at a community forum, his Navy service dress blue uniform pressed to razor creases, his bearing still proud despite everything. The shoulder injury had healed. The scar on his lip had faded. The trauma remained, invisible but present. I didn't fight for my country, so I could be treated like a criminal in it, he said, his voice steady and clear. But I also didn't fight alone. Every person who filmed that day, who spoke up, who demanded justice. You fought too. This isn't over. Not until we can all wear our uniforms, our skin, on our humanity without fear. The crowd rose in standing ovation, but Rowan's expression remained solemn. He knew the work wasn't finished. Across town, Davis sat in his darkened living room, watching the news coverage on mute. Unemployed, unemployable. His marriage had collapsed under the weight of his disgrace. His pension was gone. The badge that had defined his identity for 12 years was locked in an evidence room. He'd convinced himself for so long that his instincts were protecting people. Now he understood. His biases hadn't just destroyed Rowan's sense of safety, they'd annihilated his own life. Somewhere in another airport, another terminal, another community, officers were clocking in for their shifts. The question hung in the air like smoke. Will we learn? Or will we watch this happen again? This story is fiction, but the statistics are real. The bias is real. The violence is real. The question isn't whether this could happen. The question is, how do we make sure it stops?